Israel is unified today, but tragically, it's unified because the bodies of 3 boys kidnapped on June 12th have been found. 3 young Israelis, Gilad Shar, Naftali Frankel, and Eyal Yifrak. Their bodies were found in an open field covered with stones. The entire Israeli government had been looking for them for weeks, and now their bodies were found. They were kidnapped, they were murdered. The Israeli state is outraged as a result of this, and they know who did it as well. Hamas. These are the Hamas suspects that are believed to be responsible for this atrocity. Marwan Koezma and Amer Abu Aisha, who are well-known Hamas operatives who disappeared around this time. They are known to operate in the Hebron area of the West Bank. Now, the Israeli state has to weigh its response as a result of this, and there have already been dozens of strikes on Hamas targets, but there are also now discussions about what will happen next. Of course, Hamas has threatened that they will unleash the gates of hell if there's further strikes from the state of Israel, and President Obama has weighed in. President Obama weighed in to say that as a father, I cannot imagine the indescribable pain that the parents of these teenage boys are experiencing. The United States condemns in the strongest possible terms this senseless act of terror against innocent youth. Pretty much what you would expect. But then the president also went on to say, I also urge all parties to refrain from steps that could further destabilize the situation. Many are pointing out that seems to be sort of code. Refrain from steps that would de-escalate. He's speaking to the state of Israel, essentially saying, don't do too much. Don't go too far in response to this kidnapping, which was calculated by Hamas operatives and intended, of course, to kill these 3 boys and wound the state of Israel overall. Well, what's going to happen now? And also, there's a broader policy discussion we want to have about Obama, the state of Israel, and Israel's security in the region. To help us work through all this, we're joined by Dovid Efune. He's editor of Algemeiner newspaper. Dovid, good to see you.
Pleasure to be here, Buck.
First, let me ask you, what do you think the Israeli state's going to do now? There have been these strikes on Hamas targets. Is there going to be now a period of calm, or do you think there'll be further punitive measures in response to this Hamas, really what was a targeted kidnapping and assassination operation against 3 young boys?
Well, I think the first thing is that it's important to point out that to refer to the measures they're taking now as punitive, I don't think to be correct. What Israel is attempting to do is to secure its citizens, and that involves restoring what they call, putting Hamas on the back foot, and to have them, scared to take any action and to escalate things. So that's what they call the military deterrent. That's the word I was looking for. So Israel's looking to reinforce the military deterrent and make sure that nothing further is going to escalate. What's happening now is that the Security Cabinet is meeting, and there is a difference of opinion within the Security Cabinet between the Defense Minister, specifically Moshe Ya'alon, and the Economy Minister Naftali Bennett, who would like to see more forthright measures being taken. So the discussions are going to continue. What Deputy Minister in the office of Prime Minister Netanyahu, Ofer Akunis, told me last night, who I met with here in New York, was that things have just started. What we've seen over the last 2 weeks are just the beginning, and Israel might go a lot further, even than it went during Operation Pillar of Defense in 2012, where it struck 1,500 Hamas targets in Gaza to ensure that the deterrent is put back in place and reinforced.
Punitive measures against Hamas would seem to be warranted, though. It's not punitive measures against the general population. You want to punish the bad guys, but I want to interrupt Ellison from
well, I wanted to ask you, because Eli Lake at the Daily Beast had a report today where he said Israel's Minister of Intelligence says that in part this is a failure of the Palestinian Authority and that it may contradict the Oslo Agreement because the Hamas kidnappers came from a region that was controlled and supposed to be monitored and security controlled by the Palestinian Authority. Do you agree with that assessment, and is that maybe something that the U.S. should be discussing?
It's definitely not a secret that the Palestinian Authority is weak and ineffective on the ground, and that there are groups operating right under its nose, including Hamas and Islamic Jihad, and very often they actually operate in unison. We've seen images of the 3 groups come together, Fatah's Al-Qassam brigades, and then you have the Hamas operatives as well as the Islamic operatives with their respective yellow and green flags coming together at various events and funerals, etc. So I don't think it's new that that is the case. It's unfortunate that that is the case, but it's a symptom overall that who Israel is dealing with, the Palestinian Authority leadership, is weak and always has been weak.
And that kind of leads to my question here. Don't you consider it to be somewhat of an affront to Israel, our president's reaction, almost equating both sides as if they're measured, rational actors, when the PLO is clear? I mean, the Palestinian Authority is clearly, in bed with Hamas. It's, a unity government, right? And so that the Hamas is terrorists, but yet our president is telling Israel that, oh, well, act measured and don't do anything to escalate it, as opposed to turning around and condemning these acts and putting the Palestinians on notice. You find that as much as
it's not just the kidnapping, by the way. It's also the rockets that Hamas has been firing
that's right. They're lobbing rockets, doing all these things.
Obama's saying, let's be cool about this.
There's no question that it is, at the very least, strange that these calls for restraint always seem to happen after Hamas or whatnot, whichever group, has done its worst, and Israel is poising to respond and to restore its deterrence. And that's obviously the case here this time. I had a column actually that we published today contrasting the statements of British Prime Minister David Cameron with President Obama. And what Cameron said is, we stand by the Israeli people now in whatever efforts they have to take to defend their public. And the President Obama and the State Department even more forcefully came out and said, we call for restraint and a measured response, which of course is not the response that Israel needs now. They need to know that the U.S. and the international community is behind them, whatever steps they need to take.
Dovid, is part of this also, though, from the Obama administration perspective, the sense that the Middle East, not just the sense, the reality of the Middle East right now is in a particularly fragile state from a security standpoint? Right now, as we know, there's, of course, everything going on in Syria and Iraq, and there's even questions about Jordan, a very important buffer state for the region, a close ally of Israel. Netanyahu's weighed in, and he said we would need to support efforts by the international community to strengthen Jordan and support the aspiration of the Kurds for independence. I think it is our common interest to make sure that a moderate, stable regime like Jordan is able to defend itself. Not only is there the Israeli security issue about sort of the near field of battle, which is dealing with Hamas and these other groups, there's also the broader Middle East, which is now crumbling. Is Israel going to be forced to weigh in more heavily into that, whether it wants to or not, helping Jordan, for example?
Well, it's amazing that you bring it up, because this is exactly what I was discussing last night with Deputy Minister Efune. He described this as an Islamist octopus that Israel is dealing with. And you're talking about Hezbollah on the northern border, you're talking about ISIS and other related groups coming in the Golan, also in the north, in Syria. And then you have ISIS threatening Jordan to the east. And then, of course, you have Sinai, which is chock full of Islamist terrorists that are running free over there. So really, Israel is surrounded and will definitely do what it needs to do to protect its borders and to protect its allies in the region. And that will involve covert and overt operation. And there's no question that Jordan is a very, very pivotal player, because Jordan is the only stable border at the moment that Israel has over there on the east by the Jordan River. So whether it's going to be flying in and bombing like we saw in Syria last week, or whether it's going to be more training, as we know that the Israelis have done with the Kurds in northern Iraq and other places, or intelligence sharing, there is no doubt that Israel will do whatever it takes to ensure that its allies are secure and to secure its own borders.
Israel might. In a different circumstance, I think it was Ukraine, The Economist ran a front cover and they said, what would America fight for, was the question. And essentially the editors were starting to get worried that every time anything happens in the world, the president made a speech. What do you think it would take for him not to stand up and say, we urge restraint, for him not to stand up and stay neutral?
It's a very good question. It's a very good question. Maybe it comes back to what Winston Churchill famously said about America, that they can be counted on to do the right thing after they've tried everything else and failed. Right? We can share that as Brits. I think ultimately the American people, when they understand that the threat is real and imminent, they will jump on top of it. I think Americans care about this. They want to see the United States do the right thing. They're bogged down now with personal issues, whether it's the economy, and ignorance, frankly, on foreign policy issues is rampant, and there are a lot of people that are just not fully aware of the intricacies that we're dealing with. But when it comes to something that is obvious and that's imminent and that's large enough, America will force its leaders to act.
I hope so.
David, possible major Israeli operations on the horizon. We have to have you back to talk about that. Thank you very much for sharing your expertise tonight. It's good to see you. We have Misfit Stories coming up next.